Welcome to Discover Lafayette. I'm Jan Swift. In this episode, we focus on Terry Huval in an interview we taped in June 2018 before he retired as director of Lafayette Utility System and LUS Fiber. We discussed what it took to bring fiber optics to the city of Lafayette. I hope you enjoy this as much as I have, and thanks to LUS Fiber for making this show possible. Terry Huval, thank you for joining us today on Discover Lafayette.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this, to have the opportunity to learn about what it took to implement fiber to the home. So before we start with that, I want to say that you're really known and respected for your steady leadership of Lafayette Utility System. What was your education and what led you to this point in your career as director of LUS?
Yeah. First of all, I was raised in Brobridge, between Brobridge and Cecilia. Went to school, Brobridge High, and when I graduated from high school, made the decision that I was not going to college. Had only one person in my entire extended family that had gone to college, and I didn't see any good reason to go there. Had a couple of parents of friends who really pushed me because I had made good grades in school, and finally I decided to go into engineering because one of my friends was going into engineering. In fact, he was going to mechanical engineering, and I said, well, I'm going to go to college in mechanical engineering. And then I had another friend whose parent worked for a utility company, and he said, hey, you know what, we might need, you might want to look into electrical engineering. We hire those kind of guys. I said, well, they don't hire mechanicals? He said, no. I said, well, okay, then I'm going into electrical engineering. Yeah. It was as easy as that. My parents didn't have any money to send me to school, so it was going to be working it out myself or working through scholarships, whatever I could pull off. So I went through that, and I really enjoyed my university world. And when I graduated from college, I went to work for Gulf States Utilities in Baton Rouge. Stayed there for 3 years. Felt like I was in a foreign country. Nobody talked like me over there. And then I came to work for Gulf States in Lafayette and stayed with them for a total of 16 years until I came to work here. And so my background was not the normal, on how it worked out, but it was just I worked myself through school, paid for my school tuition, and was able to get a good job and enjoyed the work I was doing before. But when this job with the city of Lafayette came open, I was hoping that I could maybe make that happen. I knew it was a political environment. Right. Kenny Bowen was in office at the time, and had the opportunity to be here. And once I got here, I told myself, I'm not sure how many people thought it was going to happen, but I told myself this is going to be a career for me. I'm going to stay until I decide not to stay anymore, stay as long as I can.
We've been very fortunate, and you did graduate from UL, is that correct? I guess it was USL.
Yeah, I graduated from USL in electrical engineering in 1978.
Yeah. And so to support yourself, I understand that you have musical talent.
Yep, that was one of the things that kind of got me through. I started playing guitar at 10 years old. I bought a guitar from a mail order catalog. I had a little record with it and a book, and I taught myself how to play and learned how to, of course, start singing. And when I got out of high school, I started doing weddings, and I would play for wedding receptions and for the wedding ceremony and make a little money out of that. And so the whole music thing has been kind of right side by side with my engineering world.
Yeah, we're all familiar with your talent. I know you still play with your brother. He's in your band.
Yeah, I have my brother, I have my sons that have played with me. I've got the band I have now, the same band I've had for the last 30 years, same guys. And we've traveled some, seen parts of the world that we otherwise would not have seen, and it's a great recreation.
Right. Well, you've enriched our community, and I know that people love seeing you with your red cap and your red suspenders. So thank you for that, the gift you give to our community through your musical talent also. I'd like to get into talking about your lead at LUS. You were in office as director. And before the Fiber to the Home initiative, there was an initial fiber ring that was placed around the city. If you would discuss that, I think that was to benefit the utility system. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. If you kind of take a really high-level view of the utility system, we have electrical generating plants, and then we also have high-voltage transmission lines that connect up various electrical substations that we have in the community. Today, we have about 14 or 15 of those substations. Well, to operate an electric utility system effectively for reliability purposes, you have to have some type of connectivity. You have to have some kind of communication between one substation and the other. And so for a long time, the utility system used microwave dishes to do that. But at some point, that type of technology was becoming out of vogue, not supported by the industry anymore. And we looked at, well, what's the next best thing? And it turned out that fiber was it. So we start preparing ourselves to do that. And one of the things that came up at the same time that took place was a 1996 federal government Telecommunications Act was passed. And the idea was to try to encourage telephone companies to get into the cable TV business and cable TV companies to get into the telephone business so that there would be competition, because there was virtually no competition. You only had one telephone company provider, one cable TV provider. And the other thing that was going to happen is that the idea was it was going to spur up new companies that would want to offer those services. So we took a step back and we thought, well, if we're going to build a fiber line, and we needed about 12 strands of fiber to do what we wanted to do with the utility system, the cost to put in a 12-strand fiber line compared to a 96-strand fiber line was not that much difference. In fact, more precisely, for a 12-strand fiber line to hook up all of our substations, it would cost us about $3 million. If we made it into a 96-strand fiber line, it becomes $3.6 million. So 20% more for 7 times the capacity. And we thought, and if some other company wants to come in and provide telecommunication services, we can do that. So that's what we did. And at that time, the cable companies and the telephone company fought us, and it took a while to get it past the City-Parish Council, but we finally got that passed and started building our system for what we meant to build it for, which is to tie up connectivity with the utility system.
So I understand that people could offer your service, they could buy it wholesale, is that right? It wasn't available to the general public, but hospitals perhaps?
Yeah.
And
Well, at that time, it was only for us. It was just like having the electrical wiring in this building. It was only for our facilities. But it wasn't long after, down the road, before the Chamber of Commerce and LEDA started banging on our door and saying, look, the companies in Lafayette that are wanting to stay in Lafayette have to have connectivity with Houston, and they can get competitive pricing from Houston to the outskirts of Lafayette, but once again, to Lafayette, there's only one provider. And so therefore, those companies are getting gouged, and financially, it may force them to ultimately have to, move away. Could you guys provide that, what they call that last mile connectivity? Last mile connectivity is what it's called, and that means going from wherever the outskirts of Lafayette are, where the main fiber lines are along the interstate, and then bringing it to those companies. And we did that using a wholesale model. So we had companies that would buy connectivity services from us and sell it to their various companies that they worked with. And so that was the first step of us getting into an enterprise type business, but it wasn't with us having to knock on anybody's doors.
Because people saw that it was, I'm sure at that time, so much quicker than existing services.
Oh yeah, well they needed, the kind of services they needed then was far beyond what anyone was envisioning you would need from a telecommunications system. But it was essential to them. They had a lot of data to move between those two areas. And once we did that, then afterwards we started getting pressure from people in the community, citizens in the community that were frustrated because cable TV rates at that time were going up 2 and 3 times a year. And so they started pushing on their council members. So I started getting council members saying, hey, why can't you use this fiber system to provide cable TV services? And I thought, that's not what we built it for. It wasn't meant for us to do that. I expected, some other companies to maybe get a contract with us to do it, but that wasn't really happening. So the pressure kept on until we said, okay, we at least need to look at what options are out there, what communities have done this, how successful they've been, what the cost is, all the kind of due diligence things that you're supposed to do. And in doing so is when we realized, we got to a certain point, and we realized that putting in a fiber to the home system would have a long life and would provide some features that would be great today and even greater tomorrow.
What year was that? Do you know about what time period?
Yeah, so I'll give you the chronology. The idea of putting up the initial fiber ring was about a 1998 discussion. That fiber ring was in service about 2000, 2001. We started serving the wholesale customers about 2002, and then in 2004 is when we sat with I sat with Mr. Durel and we talked about the idea of having fiber in the city.
So that initial ring, would those wholesale services have been available to other big telecom companies if they had wanted to expand their service and utilize what the city was building?
Yeah, sure. They could have easily gotten with us and say we want to get from A to B somewhere in the city, and we don't have any of those fiber assets. Can we lease something from y'all? They could have done that, but they didn't. They didn't want to do anything that would help us be successful at something like this. They preferred, of course, and I can understand their business. They prefer building their own.
Because I've read around the country, sometimes the city-owned utility systems that have fiber, they will just sell it wholesale and not be
Right.
a retail provider. So, okay. Who was your team at that time, Terry? I want to get in the people that work with you, that you depended on, especially at that time back in 2003, 2004. If you can mention the team that worked with you.
Yeah, I think the team internally, the top folks I looked at was a guy by the name of Frank Ledoux. Frank and I were in college together. He's from Opelousas. He's retired now, and was our top engineer for the organization. He was my engineering manager. Mona Simon was another engineer work for us. She's passed on now, but she was a key player in helping us in laying this out. She actually had received an advanced degree in telecommunications, so she had some advantages there that would really assist us to us. Andrew Douillon. Andrew was not an engineer, but Andrew was from a business side, from the financial side, was a key guy for us. So those three people were the ones I probably leaned on the most internally. But the most important decision that we made was to get people outside that had been through this before and were experts at it. And one of the first people I hired on the outside was Randy Haney. Randy is a lobbyist in town. Randy and I were in college together. It's kind of really interesting. We were both on the SGA together. And at the time that we were on the SGA in college, Raymond Blanco was the faculty member that was overlooking us. So it's kind of really funny how that all came about. So that was in 1977, 78. But anyway, I called Randy, and he was interested in assisting us. He was excited about the idea of doing this. And then I started looking at some of the people outside of our area that could give us some assistance. We got CCG, guy named Doug Dawson was the principal of that, and he had done feasibility studies and plans and helped out with deployments of fiber in other areas. A guy by the name of Jim Ballard from Washington, D.C. is the premier guy dealing with these kind of things, and I got to know more about him through my association with the American Public Power Association, which I was on their board and ultimately became chair of that group. So I was able to kind of network not only some local talent here, which was obviously critical, but just as critical is getting people on the outside that could say, okay, before you go into this thing whole hog, we want to make sure you understand, here's the factors you're going to have to deal with, from just a business side, as well as the political factors we're going to have to deal with.
And at that point, Terry, there weren't many municipalities that had, home-owned utility systems for internet. So was it in Virginia? Where did you look first?
Yeah, it was a virtual, just a handful.
Right.
We took a bus trip, my staff and I, to go to Bristol, Virginia, which had built a system already. We went to Dalton, Georgia. We went to Jackson, Tennessee. And we did that all on the same trip. We visited each one. Each of them had actually a different technology, a different vendor they had gone with. So we were able to kind of compare those things. We got to hear what they went through. In some cases, they had some laws that had been put in place that affected them. In other cases, they didn't. But it was a really, really good education. But once we got back home, then the thing that affected us the most concerned this project was the lawsuits and the litigation that we had to deal with. But at least from the preparation perspective, I think we had done a fairly good, not completely deep review at all, but enough to know about how the system worked from an engineering and operations perspective as well as a marketing perspective.
Right. So around the same time, Joey Durel was elected City-Parish President. and he took office at the beginning of 2004. And so if you would, we'll have Joey later in the interview, but if you would talk about that. First, you wanted to ensure that you were staying on as, director of the utility system, but would you talk about those initial conversations with Joey? Because he was pro-business, and, some business people would have questioned a municipally owned internet broadband system. So would you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, Joey actually had served as the chairman of the board of the Chamber of Commerce, and at the time that he was chairman of the board was the time that we were kind of fighting about the initial fiber lines we put in just to serve the utility system, because the private companies were fighting us on that. So he was generally aware of it. When he came to offer me a job, I had two items I wanted to present to him after he offered me the job, and I said, yes, I'll take it. One was that we needed some new generators in the city, new electrical generators, and I laid out very quickly what that was about, and he felt that he understood why we needed it, and he was supportive of that. Then I talked to him about the fiber system, and I remember him asking after I kind of gave him the pitch. He says, "So are we doing this just so we can provide for cheaper cable TV?" I said, "No, it's not why you would do this." I said, you would be doing this because this is the future for this country. This is what's going to be happening down the road. Telecommunications and the internet are going to be a much bigger thing than you and I can even imagine sitting here. And we're not going to get these kind of speeds without us building it ourselves. I've talked to other people around the country, and we already see what's happening here now. Basically, most people were using dial-up at that time, and so this can set Lafayette apart. That's what I told him. And so he said, well, I'm not sure if we should do this or not, but I think we ought to take one step at a time, and we just keep going until we run into a brick wall that stops us. So if we don't run into a brick wall, we just keep going. If a brick wall stops us, then we back off. So that's kind of how the conversation went.
It was a brave proposal, and I know it took some political will to move forward. So before we move forward with that story, I'd like to get you to share, historically, Lafayette has shown leadership in not only building the first network of roads, but in starting the utility system before other municipalities were doing that. So would you talk about our history and kind of how this next step was a result of some of the leaders that came before you?
Sure. In 1896 was the time that the citizens of the city of Lafayette, the very small community, felt that they needed to have pressurized water. And to get pressurized water, they were going to need to have electricity to assist them with that. And so to build an electric and water system, and they had a vote. It was actually the property owners would only could vote because they were going to be paying the tax on it, and so it was voted, and it was according to newspaper reports I've seen, there was 111 people voting, and there was 111 people in favor of the project, unanimous. Then a new mayor came in, and he was against the project, and then he tried to kill it, and it went up to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court said, look, the people voted for this. The mayor can't arbitrarily say no. Right. So the system got built. And so back in, I guess, early 1900s, it was built, and it was one of the reasons why UL, located in Lafayette at that time, the state legislature was looking to put a place of higher learning somewhere in the Acadiana area. And there was a number of communities vying for that, and UL won it. And one of the reasons I'm told that they wanted was because there was electricity available.
Right. And that really impacted the growth of Lafayette, because at that time, other surrounding towns were larger than Lafayette.
Some of them were larger, and some of them were certainly a lot older than Lafayette. So, having an electric and water service now opened up some really great opportunities for commerce in the community.
Right. People talk about the wildcatter mentality that we have, but this is way before the oil and gas industry was here, and you can see the strong leaders, that really set the course for Lafayette's growth. And I do want to get in that the Chicago's World Fair was in 1893, and so that was right before people realized we can have pressurized water. Right. So it's just amazing looking back. And
yeah, I think some folks came back from that World's Fair and realized this whole thing about electricity is going to be something can change a town, and so that's why that connection. I mean, like I said, it was kind of follows a little story I just gave earlier. We built fiber for a certain reason, but yet there was something much bigger than that at stake in the end.
Exactly.
Same thing with, people in the city of Lafayette wanted to get pressurized water. Well, they need electricity to make that happen, and it turned out to be electricity was a differentiator for Lafayette after that.
Right. So who knows what's going to happen down the line, that because of this fiber initiative.
Back when Lafayette built this electric system, it had electricity probably some 20 to 25 years before any of the local communities had that.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. In my work with Upper Lafayette in the past, I did learn that some of the surrounding municipalities, they didn't grow because they didn't have electricity. Right. So it was really a no-brainer. If you wanted city amenities, you needed to come to the city for that. So when Joey agreed to move forward and, seeing what roadblocks may come up, it was determined that the City-Parish Council had to approve all this. And would you talk about that? Because I understand that it was projected to cost about $125 million, or you wanted to be able to borrow up to that much once you saw that this project was feasible. What was that like in those early days? How did you sell the benefits of having a municipally owned fiber
Yeah, there was a lot of things kind of working parallel at that time, and one of them was there was a state law that was being proposed by AT&T to make it impossible for us to do this. If the state law would have passed as written, it would have made it, there would have been no way a community could ever build a system, because what it said was that you couldn't use any money to build a telecommunications system that you didn't earn from having sold telecommunication services.
So it never happened.
So it means it never happens. But fortunately, we were able to get that modified to at least where we had a sliver of a crack of being able to get through that. Once we were in that position, we kind of knew what the playing field was going to be looking like. We went to the city council and we laid out why we thought we should do this. One, and they already knew, because the council members had been coming to me before then about saying, wait, why aren't you guys able to offer some alternative services, because we're getting gouged by the private guys. So some of them were already asking for that. Others were a little bit more doubtful and didn't know if government should be getting involved in that. Of course, the folks that were representing the cable and telephone interests were making a lot of noise about this is not a good thing for government to do. So all of that kind of gloom and doom type of stuff. Our position was, look, this is the infrastructure of the future. Lafayette showed that it was a forward-thinking utility in 1896, a forward-thinking city in 1896, and built an electric system, and look how wonderful it has been for our community. Now we have the same opportunity to do this here, and we had to keep explaining, Internet's going to be much bigger than any of us envisioned it to be.
Because really at that time, most of us weren't thinking about that. It was just a short time ago. And I also remember, Terry, in the community, some leaders on the education front and people that worked to help the under-resourced, people like John St. Julian, who's no longer with us. There were many people stepping up, realizing that this could equalize the playing field no matter what your economic status is. So you had different groups that were interested in this.
Yeah, it was kind of surprising, just different groups kind of popping up all over the place, people I did not know before, that were saying, hey, this is a good thing for our city. And they were looking at it from a lot of different perspectives. We looked at it from a commerce perspective, from a perspective of competition, but there were people like John and others said, hey, this can raise all boats in the community to a different level. It was really nice to see all those different perspectives coming to the table, and that kind of helped to amplify why this was so important.
And I think it helps to see too that when there's really a cause that benefits everyone, it's easier to do the right thing.
Yes.
You don't have to take sides for everyone to benefit. And I know it's raised the level of services that we all get from all the providers. So I was interested when I read that history. And so it went to a vote of the voters. The city of Lafayette voted on whether or not you would be able to move forward to borrow money. And if I remember the facts correctly, it was a 62% positive vote. So the voters wanted to see this project move forward. That
was in July of 2005, and we had to have that vote because of the lawsuits that were imposed upon us by the private guys. And one of the interesting things we saw as the election came came forward was a level of enthusiasm by the people in the city, coming up with their own little videos that they put together as to why we should have, fiber in the city. I think called the Fiber Film Forum. Into people coming up and saying, we're going to raise money to help to, educate the community on what needs to be done there. And on the election day, I remember so well that we had the president or chairman of the Republican Party in the parish, which at that time was David Bertrand, and the chairman of the Democratic side, which was Stephen Handwerk. They were sitting in an office building side by side, both making phone calls, asking people to vote yes.
Quite a sight, huh?
Yes.
To see those two together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And because they both saw it as being something beneficial to the community, whether it's the business side or the people side.
Mm-hmm. I may be triggering a memory for you. I know that most people didn't know what fiber was, and we were thinking like Metamucil. Remember some people
That's
making
right.
fun about it? I was in Leadership Lafayette. I remember visiting with you, and they would show, we want fiber. And most of us weren't thinking what this even meant. And then once we learned how it would benefit us, it was easy to support it. But that was really that was a fight to get that done.
Yeah.
And so as soon as the community voted, there were more lawsuits.
That's correct.
That came up, and they weren't from people that lived here.
Yeah, well, there was a person that lived here. Her name was Elizabeth Naquin, that was tied to the suits. I don't know who that person is. I never met her. I don't know anything about her, but she did live in the city of Lafayette and lent her name to be part of that lawsuit. And it went through several iterations, because they would sue us for something, and then if the courts didn't support us, and we said, okay, well, we'll change our bond ordinance to accommodate that, then they would sue us for something else. And finally, we said we're going to push the issue, and we went up to the appeals court and lost, and said we're going to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court ruled in our favor, 7-0,
Right.
unanimously.
Right, which says a lot. You had a good legal team. We'll be talking with Pat Ottinger in a bit, but that was that was an uphill battle getting to that point. So that must have been quite a feeling that we've given it our best and we're moving forward.
Yeah,
So.
it did. And the thing that we constantly looked to every time we had a new stone thrown at us is to make sure that we had the best minds around the table, the people who had been there, the right resources, the right team. And when we were going through the entire battle with the state Supreme Court, we had new people that came in who had familiarity with dealing with the Supreme Court that could help us in how we framed our arguments and so forth. And I that's the part when I've talked to others that I tell them is the most important thing is having a strong team, people that have been there, a deep bench of resources. Yeah, it costs money to get that done, but had we not brought those resources to the table, we would not be talking about this project because we would have failed.
Yeah. So you were ready to move forward then with the fourth utility, fiber to the home. And so that started, let's see, first customers received service in 2009. When did you start laying the lines?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court victory was in February of 2007. Then we borrowed the $125 million in July of 2007, and then started bringing the engineering team in, the vendors. We had to choose which fiber to the home product we were going to use. There was a number of vendors, knocking on our door, asking us to consider their product. And we made a decision. We started laying fiber and started serving our first customers in February of 2009.
Mm-hmm. So by 2010, most of Lafayette had availability.
Yeah, our plans were to have the whole city wired with fiber, at least that part of the city that was existing in 2004.
Exactly.
We would plan to have that done by sometime in 2011, but actually we did it faster and got it laid out much more quickly.
Yeah, where we live, I think we were one of the last outposts. We lived near town, but we were right across the street from some of the major areas, and I have to tell you, that was quite a day getting LUS. We went everything, phone, TV, and internet, and the service differential was incredible. And we haven't looked back. We've been enjoying increased service since then.
That's right.
Speeds.
That's right. And the thing when we put this together, it takes a lot. I mean, we've got about 70 employees working there now, but we had to start from scratch on how to learn how to do this, how to market it. I mean, we were in an electric, water, and sewer business that we didn't really have to market anything, so now we had to learn how to do that, how to build those relationships, how to kind of, how to frame our products, how to choose what the prices were going to be. All those decisions had to be made almost in a vacuum because we never had been there before, but we would look at what the competition was doing, we'd try and look what other cities were doing, we'd discuss it amongst ourselves, and, fortunately, I think we kind of hit all the right formulas, and the formulas needed to be something that was attractive to the customers to buy our services, but also financially prudent on our side so we could get the revenues necessary to be successful in the long term.
Yeah, and without belaboring the negativity, I know there was a good deal of criticism in the early days about the cash flow, and it was always known that it would take some time for this to be a positive cash flow for you at Lafayette Utility System, the fiber initiative. In other communities around the country, they didn't all make it, did they? So it was, you were really having to learn as you move forward.
Yeah, each state had their own opportunity to set laws or not set laws relative to that. And in some states, the impediments they put in place made it difficult or impossible for some cities to succeed. But some cities tried anyway, and they'll end up failing. And failing, I guess you can say, well, you end up failing if it turns out you can't keep your business up. But if it turns out that by failing you turn your system over to Google, then maybe it's not such a bad deal. And that's what happened like in Provo, Utah. Their law did not allow them to sell retail services to individual customers. It was going to be like an open access system, as they call it, where any company could say, I'm going to buy services from you to serve customers, kind of like our wholesale business. Well, what happens with that sort of situation, since those guys selling to the end user customer don't have to worry about paying the tab of the big system on the back end, they're only trying to get the low-hanging fruit. They're only trying to get a place where they get the best amount of money. And well, that's fine. You end up at that point losing the opportunity to serve many more customers that would be necessary to pay the freight. So what happened in Provo's case, they never could get enough money to be able to pay for the freight. So at some point, Google approached them and they sold the system to Google. And so now those companies that were pushing against the city of Provo now have to compete against Google.
Yeah, I read about that. They sold for a very low sum.
Like $1.
Yeah. I guess just to make it legal to have a contract where there was consideration. But yeah, so those were heady times. And I know it's taken a few years. Here we are in 2018. The system has been recognized for being not only one of the best in the country, but affordable. So you must feel good about some of the accolades you've been receiving.
Yeah, we in 2016 is when we became fully net income positive, and it's been growing ever since. And the dynamics of this system is that you got to spend a lot of money on the front end before you get customer number one, and then you have to have operations people that you hire and you're paying for before you have customer number one. So you got a huge load that carries there. But as you get enough customers, you end up in a situation where now that cost of operation is about the same whether you have 50 customers or 5,000 customers or 15,000 customers, and so what happens is that the revenues start surpassing what those operating costs are and debt service costs are, and that's where we are today. I think this year we're going to have about $8 million of free cash that we'll have available to be able to serve other areas and upgrade our system and so forth. So we'll have enough after we pay off our annual debt service and our operating costs to be able to do the expansions that we're doing today.
And Terry, to make sure I understand, the service isn't limited if the city continues to grow or the parish as you expand outside of the city of Lafayette. Will there be major upgrades needed in the city, or is the system in place able to meet the demands of the next decade, let's say?
Yeah, the way the network is built is that it has virtually unlimited capability to grow.
Earlier, yeah.
It's all about those different substations that I talked about earlier for the electric side. That's where we have our huts for the fiber system. also, which provides for great reliability because those electrical substations are our most reliable pieces of real estate. But it also provides a means for us to extend out to serve other places. And we can build additional huts like that at a fairly low cost to extend out. But right now, we're in a position that we can serve outside the city in certain areas where it makes good financial sense for us to do so. But we can do that without having to make major investments in infrastructure. It's mainly just putting in the lines, not having to build a new electronic piece of real estate. We have had multiple cities come in Louisiana come to approach us and saying, look, we love what y'all are doing here. Can we do it in our own town? And my job is to make sure I tell them, yeah, you can, but here's what you better be ready to fight.
Yeah.
And, and here's the issues that we have to go with. And none of them have done it. We're the only city in the state to do this because of the state law that we have. And had we not had Joey Durel in office for 12 years, we would not have made it. I can say that positively because it took having a mayor who was committed to the project and staying for the entire 12-year term to get us through all that we had to go through. When you think about the fact that I talked to him about this before he was even in office, we started getting our initial fights 4 months after he was in office. We had to fight lawsuits until we got to 2007, which was 3 years after he was in office, and then we had to fight the battle of getting to a point where we were financially viable so people would quit shooting shells at us saying that we weren't making money yet, until the end of his term. It took that long to make it there. So it's a very, very difficult politically for somebody like him and the council to have to go through that. And it's very difficult for people like us who are the builders of the system to operate at that pace because it was a very, very quick pace, even though it seems like it took a long time. It's a huge business. When you start talking about trying to serve a city of 125,000 people, 50 square miles, and building all these lines and running a system and trying to become profitable, lot to go with that. So thank goodness we had that stability from an elected official perspective to help carry us through that.
He never wavered in his support of the project, and I know it was due to his trust in you. And I look forward to hearing what he's going to say when you two visit together. But it was because of you and your abilities that carried that trust for him. So it's a good partnership.
It took a lot of people, a lot of resources,
Yeah.
and there's no doubt that you had a hard-headed Cajun that was leading it. But I just, I was so impressed when we got the vote passed and the people supported us, because at that point for me there was no turning back. Then we knew we had to make it. We had to do what the people asked us to do. We had to show them that they could trust us to deliver.
I want to thank you, Terry, for your service to our community and for your personal support of this endeavor, Discover Lafayette. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
On behalf of Lafayette Utility System, I'd like to thank you for watching this in-depth episode of Discover Lafayette. And if you're listening to the podcast edition, you can catch this episode and all of our episodes on discoverlafayette.net. On behalf of Discover Lafayette, I'm Jan Swift. Thank you.